Hello there. My name is Colin Danspa. Welcome back to Metropolis. I'm here with CUTV's very own Local 514 star Ode Simo.
Hi, Calden.
How
How
are you
are
doing?
you? Oh, I'm good, and you?
Jinx.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also good. Thank you. Thank you. Today you have brought on a serious topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's this interview you did before we actually watch this interview. Give us a little preamble as to what motivated this interview, what you were curious to find out, and I guess for our audience, what the topic is.
Yeah, so at the end of May 23rd to be more precise, I had an interview with Stéphanie Germain, who is a community worker that specifically does work. She does work a bit everywhere, I would say, but she specifically does her work in Montreal North. And we had an interview following Abisai Cruz's death, which happened on the weekend of March 29th and 30th, where two other people were also killed by Quebec police. Abisai was killed by police in Montreal. So this is something I wanted to know more about, like just like because I know she gave a speech at the event, but also considering that she works with youth, closely to youth, I wanted to know how has this been impacting the community? What has she seen? And her work in general, how has it been? And just the bigger issue of like trust towards police. Because obviously this is not the first time that we see people in Montreal getting killed by police. We've seen this many, many times, or just even like institutions linked to police. We've seen this with Freddie Villanueva. We've seen this with Nikos Dangerous Spring, Nicolas Gibbs, Jean-René Junior Olivier, Sheffield Matthews, and many, many more people. Where either people asking for help during a crisis, a mental health crisis, or just, you know, uh, during an everyday event, get killed by police. They get approached by police and they get killed. So yeah, I wanted to talk with her just to discuss what has been the community feeling after this, but also what were their demands, how have they been feeling about police, their usual police brutality kind of like conversation, what can be done, what would they like to see be done, and just like yeah, just talk about how her work has been impacted by this as a community worker.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm sure like it's always such a big question, right? Of how to kind of like the attempts at trying to ease the harsh effects of like systemic racism in Quebec, and then of course like there's the difficulties in just trying to get these institutions, of course, to be less harmful.
Yes.
But then some people don't even recognize the harm, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
I always think of the classic example of Legault at I believe it was the 2018 debate, saying there's no systemic racism in
Yeah.
Quebec.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like in our current context, like the SPVM has been found guilty multiple times
Yeah.
of racial
Yeah.
discrimination. Just recently, they made it so that they could not, so people could leave street checks, right? Because
Yeah.
before,
Exactly.
if STM cops were doing, SPVM cops were doing. Street checks, people were sort of bound to
Yeah.
that interaction, and they'd have to be sort of questioned and interrogated and harassed by police. But now there's been enough pushback that now even they couldn't follow up with that. But anyways, that's just to
Yeah. No.
paint
No. Yeah.
the giant question of what to do with these institutions, how they cause harm, how to alleviate that harm. So I'm really curious. I'm really interested in watching this clip you've brought for us.
Perfect. I'm gonna show you the clips to you and the viewers.
For us, he was really like something that we kind of feel like we lived for the past, I would say, 10, 20 years ago. So it was really, really shocking because when Freddie Villaneva lost his life to the hand of the police, there were so many I remember politicians, so many people talking, saying that there will be change, everything's going to change. And I remember there was like meetings with the community members and police officers trying to talk about like the issues going on. And I feel like we had so many conversation, we did so many, recommendation regarding like how can the police change the way they intervene with the communities who were historically marginalized, right? So when something like that happened, it's like we feel like, for me especially, I feel like I lost a lot of credibility when I talk to the youth, when I tell them respect the law, do what you have to do, because when they see videos like that, when they see police brutality, they're like, "Well, you guys are asking me to do the right thing, but what about the police? What about them when they do something bad? Who is looking at? Who is telling them that this is wrong?" So this is really, I would say, painful and also discouraging, because we do so much community work because we want safety within our communities, because we are the first affected by that non-safety. But when something like that happen, it's like, let's say we have to rebuild every time. We have to do the work over and over again. So yeah, I felt like the community members felt that too. It's like we are the first, the families are affected by that, the youth themselves, and then the community, but also broader the society. Because for me, when we think about security, when we think about safety, we need to think about health also. That's why I always say, like, we need to think about violence also as a health public issue, because when violence happen, and I would say let's put it on into the state violence, because any type of violence for me, it's a state violence because it's a shared responsibility, right? So when that happen, I feel like we don't think about the way that violence affect us, affect like our health, the way we feel, the way when we wake up, the way we engage with each other. So I think the health of the community members are often left alone. When we think about violence, it's always like security, security, but what about the well-being of the community who are facing those violence?
There was the clip of yourself and your interview with Stephanie Germain,
Yes.
a community worker who works across Montreal with a bit of a focus in Montreal Nord. There's a lot of really interesting things that she said in that interview to me. I think that first part about that's not quite the first part, but the part where she shared about the youth asking her, why is it that we have to do the right thing? I'm paraphrasing here, but like, you're telling us to do the right thing, but who's telling the police to do the right thing?
Yeah.
Right? That kind of, that there shows an unevenness there, right? And I think, I mean, this seems like a real struggle, I think, as a community worker, right? Where you're trying to promote, I guess, lawfulness. You're trying to promote like I guess like upright behavior. We want to stand tall. If you're talking to the police, just be like, like, don't give them any reason. Is sort of like the conversations I hear often. But then there's the question of who's policing the police, right?
Yeah.
And that makes me think about the because we do in Quebec, we do have a watchdog, right? For the any police body here in Quebec. Anytime there's a murder, there's an organization that kind of reviews evidence, and they determine whether or not this murder was
It's the BEI, right?
the BEI, yeah. But then here's the issue with the BEI. It's the BEI is sort of run to be this watchdog, and we like to think, oh, thank goodness that there's this organization that kind of like polices the police. Almost all of those are former cops.
Yeah.
Almost everyone in the
Yeah.
BEI is former cops, except for the person. I believe the director of it has to be sort of elected to that position or appointed, and that person is usually not a cop. But if everyone else in that body is
Yeah.
going to be a police officer, it's sort of like in a field of peers judging their own peers as police officers, they're, because they grew up in that system too, they're not going to believe
Yeah.
these cops did anything wrong, because usually it's like, oh, the way I was brought up, the way the institution has served me, how I have served it, this person did everything right. It's sort of like it continues to perpetuate the misdoings and these kinds of murders at the hands of the police. The second thing I thought was I think really key here, and I think you highlighted this before, is this idea of really trying to center this idea of public health with these kinds of I guess dealings, because it's like when we saw what we saw with ABC Cruz, what we saw with Sheffield, the young man in Repentigny, what was his name?
Jean-René Junior Olivier.
Thank you. Yeah, those are all these cases of crises, and this is just to name a few, right?
Yeah.
Like you have these men who are in crisis, black men who are in crisis, and the police show up, and the police just, I mean, I will say now, because of the way that's set up institutionally, the gaze of the police, that institution, sees these black men as potential threats, right? And then I mean, I will say, like, not to give them too much credit. Like sometimes, of course, like if someone is in crisis, they're like, they do feel like a threat, right? I've seen people in kind of like mental health crises, and they can be like really like on edge. They can be like kind of like hard to predict, you know. But then the idea is like the solution isn't really to kill them, you know. That's no solution at all.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it shows that like a lot of times, like this work that police are doing in trying to do either these like wellness checks or crises sort of like management, it shows that they're completely inequipped for this kind of stuff, you know. It kind of reminds me, like, back in the past, ambulances used to be run by the police. It was supposed to be police running these ambulances, and there was just like constant deaths in these police run ambulances, you know. And it's because it was not really their job to do that. And then like there's a concerted effort to split that task, give it to something else, like an EMT department, and then as soon as they did that, deaths go down, you know. Because you've created this new institution which is not really based on the institution of a violence that the police is, you know. It's sort of like, I mean, when you think about what they're set to do, and the main tool that they have is like a violent repression, using force. They're gonna. It's like that thing of like, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail, you know. That's sort of what happens. I feel very often with police.
Actually. But exactly, and even then, like, even the training of police as well. We've talked about this before. The training of police is like very, very minimal. I don't remember how many hours they have to do, but I remember at some point I was looking into it and I was like, how is this actually like legal? Like, you're supposed, for something that's so big, for a job that's supposed to be so big of protecting people, as well, at least like how they're selling it, how can me, let's say, like, you know, you and I, basically me in university, are doing something, you know, my training is almost as much as you.
And you don't have a gun.
Yeah, exactly. And I think my training is even more than them. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not normal that so many few hours are put into like actually taking the security and safety of people seriously. And then you have a gun, you have a taser, you have batons, you have paper spray. It's all things you can use.
You have an armored truck.
Yeah, exactly. You have the riot police with their like I forgot the word for this stuff that they use. The shields. Yeah, exactly. They just come in and just start, like, you know, I've been to protests many times and I've been like pepper sprayed by police as well. And they're just so quick on it. They're just like, you know, as soon as something that they don't like happens, even if it's so small, they're just gonna start pepper spraying people. And that's exactly the issue, right? Like, police is supposed to protect people, but then they more so assault people more than anything else. And that's exactly what I felt like Stephanie was talking about. Like, for example, it's making her work harder, so much more harder, because then the youth, as you mentioned again, is like, well, why are you telling me to trust the police? But then every time I come in contact with them or I hear about them, it's because they killed someone I know or someone close to me or someone who resembles me, right? Like, how am I supposed to trust someone that is going after people who look like me in my community? Like, that makes sense. And I do, of course, I find it kind of unnerving that it makes her work harder, because again, it's also the youth trust her to tell them, you know, how to live in society, I guess, and how to, like, you know, make connection and stuff like that. But then if every time she tells them to, you know, like, when you interact with police, you have to act this way, you have to make sure that they don't have a reason to like brutalize you, and then they still do it, they're just gonna be like, well, Stephanie, like, you keep saying that, and yet every time something happens, so how am I supposed to trust your words now? How am I supposed to know that you actually know what you're telling me? So it also makes her work harder, right? So that's, I think, is very interesting to think about. People don't really think about the middleman, if I can say. They always think about, okay, but people don't trust police, but they don't think about how that also creates distrust in the community with people who are there to mitigate anything that doesn't go right. So that's also something that I thought was really interesting in what she said. And I do feel for her because obviously, like, youth, like having to take care of youth is already not easy. And when you're young, you're obviously, there's some stuff you still don't understand, or, or you can be more like reactionary too, I guess. So it does make things harder. And no, it's really unfortunate. And they also don't address anything that they've done, right? You mentioned the BEI, but then apart from that, we don't really hear from police about like, because they don't want to admit that something happened, because then if they do, oh yeah, we did kill this person, then it kind of like all hell breaks loose, if I can say. But yeah, I don't know. It's just very, it's just not even a word from politicians. And I know she mentioned also medias as well, how media's only started to cover this once politicians started talking about this, but before nobody was actually making sure to get their opinion and their experience out. They were just not there.
No, I feel like when we do hear about, I believe it was I think it was Nicholas Gibbs, but like I feel like that happens where like whenever there is a murder, I feel like the response from the media, I think since the George Floyd protests, I think maybe there's been some improvement. At least I know in like CBC, I see more consideration on like police budgets and kind of bringing that into question. But I remember like if we talk about like places like Journal de Montréal, anytime there's a police murder, they're trying to find information about the victim having like some kind of criminal charge, some kind of like bad history, So clearly the angle is like, look, he was one of the bad ones.
Yeah, they're doing the work to demonize the person, and that's actually something we've seen so many times, right? Yeah. Often without getting into race too much. Often like when the assailant is white, or at least the victim is white, or whatever. Like in any case, I
think it's impossible to not talk about race.
Yeah, when we're talking about this, because it is about marginalized communities being brutalized by institutions.
And this is not to give any kind of generalized thing, but I think there are ways that like institutions serve certain ideas of race, and there's a way that sort of continues itself.
But yeah, like that's exactly it. Like, something where someone like Abisai is literally the victim, or Nicholas Gibbs is literally the victim, you can find ways that they'll be demonized. People will literally, even George Floyd, like, they'll go in the past and find a picture of one person with a gun, or, a knife, or something that they said. They'll find any way to demonize this person. But then when you literally have a crime committed by a white person, it's like, oh, he used to be an angel, troubled teen.
What about his future?
Mental health. Yeah, exactly. And it's like this person committed a crime and is literally like, what is the contrary of like demonized? Like angelized? I know it's not a word, but angelized. Let's say angelized. You know what I mean? Angelized. Yeah. And then someone who's literally a victim is demonized. Yeah. How is the victim demonized, but the assailant?
There's so much forgiveness given to like, let's say like some like white shooter, and then they're like, oh no, poor him, like he's young,
mental health,
he has his whole future ahead of him. But then like no one uses those words with the same fervor for like black people, whenever they're the victims of like any kind of police violence, even violence by like people who aren't police, right? Because we're not limiting this just to the kind of police murders, especially here in Canada.
Yeah, and actually that makes me think of something, because, in the interview, Stephanie did mention, like, it being a public health issue. And one thing that I did find interesting about that is that I think one way we can look at, like, violence being a public health issue is how this kind of creates distrust also with other institutions, like not just police, but if all institutions who are kind of similar and supposed to protect people or help people with their health, let's say, don't do that. Like, why would I trust the police and then trust, like, if I can say, like, the healthcare system, right? Like, the same people who are supposed to protect me or not. So the same people who are supposed to treat me, are they also gonna hurt me at some point? Yeah. And we've seen this too with like Joyce Echaquan, right? Like, for example, her nurses, like there was a lot of backlash from community, and I feel like people in the community did say that the nurses should be like terminated, like fired. But I didn't see much from like medias and like even police and stuff like that talking about how what she did was wrong, or how like, like actually take on the subject of like the mistreatment of Joyce Echaquan, and like how someone like this should not be in the healthcare system. If you cannot take care of everyone, you shouldn't be a nurse, you shouldn't be a doctor, you shouldn't be like, that's not how it works. Like you take a vow. I don't know if they literally take a vow, but you take technically a vow.
It's a Hippocratic oath.
Yeah, you take a vow to take care of people, and then you're taking care of people is literally like you're picking who you're taking care of. So yeah, it's,
I mean, it's these unchecked biases, right? I mean, that's why things like I find any kind of like actual social studies education, the kind of liberal arts stuff that needs to be like almost like the stuff we imagine, like the conservatives would call like any kind of woke propaganda in schools. Like, no, it's actually like, I mean, I think that term is used very like liberal, like very like loosely.
Yeah.
But I do think there is a utility in like having like a lot of people in the STEM fields do that kind of like, I don't know if you want to call it like sensitivity training or at least some kind of like introduction to it. But of course, it's never a guarantee, right? But it's like, how do you begin to deal with addressing these kinds of unchecked biases in these systems, right? And I think it's really unfortunate in places like hospitals, because it's like it's like you're saying, right? If this is a public health issue, because if someone is in a crisis and they have seen other, let's say like black people in crisis, the black man is in crisis, he's seen other black men in crisis, their loved ones call the police, that happens to them, why should he call the police?
Yeah, exactly.
Why should he call 911?
Yeah.
Why should he seek help? And it just kind of like, it delays treatment, it delays any kind of healing, it delays any kind of rehabilitation, right, into some kind of normal, healthy life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same thing also with Abisai. I know Abisai's case has been quite not compared, I wouldn't say compared, but like, people have looked at the similarities between his case and Freddie Villanueva's case. I think they were both underruns, if I'm not mistaken. But just again, like, if you're saying someone like Abisai died at the hands of police and Freddie Villanueva died at the hands of police, why, as a young Latinx person, should you actually, trust the police? Like, you're saying people who look like you, once again, it all comes back to saying people who look like you being mistreated by different institutions. You're not going to trust those institutions. There's no way that, like, I will want to call police if I see, well, I mean, and I wouldn't want to anyways, but, I will not want to call police if I see that everyone around me, all of my black friends are being killed by police,
Yeah, of course.
Because I'll be afraid of
based on the evidence.
Yeah,
the
exactly. I'm like, okay, they're
clearly,
they're clearly there to kill us and not help us. So that's one thing too. I do want to go back to the public health issue because I know we kind of skimmed over it quickly. I do think it's a very interesting take because it's the first time I hear someone talk about this, because as Stephanie said herself, like, people, when they talk about police brutality, the main theme around it is safety and how it's a public safety issue. But saying it as a public health issue is very, very kind of reassuring, but also it's a very good take in my opinion, because it's true that we don't really talk about how this impacts mental health, physical health, and just as she said herself, like the way you're gonna interact with your own community and other people, and just like it's a big health issue. Honestly, it's like what it leads to, and the hard time of also, like, if you survive that kind of incident, let's say, like, being shot by police, right? Like, health-wise, we don't really have the systems, or not the systems, but the, like, programs put into place to actually receive the support that you need to kind of reintegrate yourself into society, right? Like, after saying, for example, like, a family member die at the hands of police, like, who's gonna, of course you can find a therapist, but other than that, who's actually helping you to heal?
No, of course.
So it's true that mental health, we I feel like we talk about it, but we don't really talk about it. Three talks. Yeah.
I mean, what this makes me think of is sort of like Frantz Fanon.
Yeah.
Like the was it the therapist from Martinique? He spent a lot of time in Algeria during the War of Independence, treating people. And his whole thing was like, the people come in here for the therapy, for this kind of mental health. It's like a lot of this stuff is like, it's not just like, I had a bad day. It's like, I live in this system of oppression. I live in this colonial system, which was like, at the time of his practice, it was like France just doing like unspeakable things to like Algerians, Berbers living there in Algeria, and
Everyone.
there's such. I mean, there's absolutely, of course, like in most cases of colonialism, this thing of racial discrimination there. But and who's not to say that this doesn't apply to these kinds of systems here as well, right? Of like, of course, to absolutely different scale and different context. But like,
Yeah.
there's a thing of like, if this supposed mental health is all good, go see a therapist, talk to people, get it out. But there is absolutely some level of like, how much of this is me to
Yeah.
shoulder this burden, and how much of this is just this system we live in, which consistently oppresses me, denies me any kind of
Yeah.
idea of health, prevents me from reaching this kind of whatever my own goals of health are, right? And that, I think there's something really interesting about shifting an idea towards health and away from safety. Because I think there's a lot of, like, when you think about, when I think about safety, I think a lot of times it can be weaponized, instrumentalized, right? Like, I think about times where, like, I mean, like, in these kinds of scenarios, we talk about, like, let's say, like I don't want to create like too much of a hypothetical, but like we can imagine, like, let's say some nervous white woman who sees two black men arguing in the street,
Yeah.
right? For her, it might be a question of safety. And this is such a, of course, I absolutely
No, but
take
based
accountability.
on like the stereotypes,
Yeah.
stereotypes.
I'm not
And I mean,
saying-
like,
it's not you.
historically speaking, like we've seen this a lot where, I mean, you think about the Brooklyn Five, right? Like you've seen this so many times where
Central Park Five. No, right?
Huh?
The Brooklyn Five?
I don't know why I said Brooklyn Five.
The Central Park Five.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No,
my
it's
bad,
fine,
my
that's fine,
bad.
that's
I
fine.
do know my history. Thank you.
Still
But
is
I will
selective.
just say that, like, we've seen this so many times of like white women, calling police as soon as they see a black man come towards them, even though they're not even remotely close to them, or like as soon as a black man is in around close by, they'll go to police or go to someone to
Right,
say
right.
like,
Because
oh, my
they're-
safety was threatened.
Yeah. Because, which, I mean, safety is such a subjective thing. Like most things are, but like there's a way that it's subjective enough that it can be weaponized. Because then, if you feel like your safety is at risk, then you can call the police, right? And they're here to make you safe, not necessarily these other people safe, right? And like even if nothing's happening, it's enough to get someone to show up, right? I also think about. I think we don't even have to go as far as New York, right? We can think about our own context in Montreal, where we think about, like, I think about the way safety has been sort of weaponized by certain Zionist lobbies, right? Because very often, like, the question of safety for Jewish students is brought up either at the encampment, at protests. People will say, "Oh, these are anti-Semitic events, and my safety is at concern here," But like when the first time they tried to do an injunction at McGill against the encampment about the idea of safety, the judge threw it out because it was clearly it was completely unfounded. And also at these encampments, you have Jewish students, right? You have Jewish students, you have Jewish leaders there, community leaders who are there, who are part of the encampment, right? So it's like this is another example where, like, I think they've tried to use this idea of safety, and it's just used to completely oppress another person, right? Their idea of safety is supposed to sort of triumph over another person's safety, right? And the police is called. That's why I really like to bring it all back. I really like this idea of health, right? Because it's like the person can't say my health is in danger here, because there's actually, like, I think it's still,
true.
health is still, like, I think a little, like, it's a little less contentious than the idea of safety, because it's still subjective. It's less subjective because, I mean, there's also, then we can get into a long discussion about what is a healthy person, right? Then we get into, like, discussions that a lot of, like, disabled scholars are talking about when they talk about health. I've had this one old friend of mine who had undergone a lot of health problems, who did a lot of research into our ideas of health, and they put out this great article about, like, don't tell me get well soon, don't tell me that kind of stuff. You just say take care, and I mean, that's just, I'm giving, like, a little small sampling of that discussion. But anyways, all this to say, health, the centering of health over the centering of safety, I think, is something that could be promising in these kinds of discussions and these kinds of perspectives, especially when we're talking about the health of these BIPOC communities, the men of these BIPOC communities, and the women, of course, being put at risk when the police is involved.
Yeah, but the thing is, will institutions follow through with that, notion of, like, how violence is actually a public health issue? That's the thing.
I think you can't. So I mean, this gets into another large discussion of like I don't think. I mean, so you're right. I mean, there's a whole thing about was it Audre Lorde, the master's tools will not take apart the master's house. So you can't really expect these institutions to really kind of go against what they've been programmed to do. But I think you have. I mean, what you should do is you should constantly push, constantly pressure, organize, mobilize to constantly put pressure on these institutions. And to also, I would say, to raise the next generation. So once this next generation of people enter these institutions, there might be some new floor of morality, right? That's met. And this is, of course, like, I mean, it's very privileged, I think, of me to suggest these like generational shifts to a problem that is immediate, right? Like I think like the lives of Black, Brown immigrant communities here in Montreal. They need to be protected, and I don't think what I'm suggesting is going to be this immediate protection. But I do think you can't. I mean, you can't just do nothing, right? You have to. Do I expect these institutions to be like, yeah, you're right, we did bad? Of course,
do it. Yeah.
But you gotta constantly push, and you gotta raise the floor of awareness and morality.
For sure. Although we could go into another. It's such a complex like topic in a sense, because also like there's the also like the fatigue that comes with also always being the one pushing, right? And even again, Stephanie talked about this, right? Like
I can imagine she must be so tired.
Yeah, because again, she's trying to breach kind of like the the space between police and youth, where she has to be tired, because then the police tells her one thing and then she's like, hey, like no, like and then she has to tell youth, and then youth is like, well, those people, no thank you. So yeah, it's tiring always having to like push, but at the same time, for sure, we need to work towards like change that actually is lasting and is in the future, because
I'd say push in a way that's sustainable for you.
Yeah,
it's not all on one person's shoulders.
No,
it takes a village. Make the change be sustainable for you. I don't know. Make it sustainable, make it ongoing, make it so that there's someone who's always there, kind of pushing it. It's all, I don't know. It's just, you can't, because to do nothing, then they win, right? They win automatically. And also to talk. I mean, I wish I could get into this as well, but like there's also the question of how so much of the SPVM does not live in these neighborhoods.
That's
right?
They come from
the suburbs,
Longueuil,
right? They come from Longueuil, Boucherville, other like sections of the suburbs, and they come into the city to police it, right? And I think there's another attitude question there, but we're sort of out of time.
Yes. So I guess do your research.
Where can people see this full interview?
You can see it on our YouTube channel, and we're also maybe gonna post clips of it. Maybe
Shareable clips for social media. Oh my.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well,
if you give us how many followers do we have? If you give us 1,000 followers, then we're gonna post all the clips.
Okay. I like how you're demanding.
We're 700 people out, but
All right.
I mean, on Instagram, not on YouTube. We're good on YouTube.
We're good on YouTube. I think
we're not. We could have more followers.
No, let's not give up on that front. Well, anyways, thank you so much, Aude, for coming on, sharing this clip of this interview you did. Thank you for doing this interview. And,
of course.
I'm sure we'll hear more about this as these kinds of stories develop. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Calden, for having me.
Of course.